Everyone. I'm Carolyn King with the Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Justice and with Sowers of Justice. I'm happy to have several people back who have joined us before, and anyone new, you're certainly welcome as well. This is our third of three conversations around community safety and alternatives to violent policing. We started out saying what's going on, and tonight we're going to be talking about what's next. So what we would like you to do is find your chat function and let us know who you are, if you don't mind, putting your name in the chat, and possibly if you're part of a faith community or an organization, put that in as well. And if you don't feel we have your contact information, you could add that too. We also like to use the chat as we go along to enter thoughts that you might have, reflections, maybe questions too, as the speakers are speaking. So we kind of keep that as a running record of what people are discovering in our conversations. We've had two excellent evenings with just very dynamic speakers. So we're excited tonight to have two speakers. We're going to have speakers be the first half of the program, and then we'll have time for questions. And then we are going to have a discussion just as a group, not in breakout sessions, but as a whole, on what things we can do next in this whole campaign. So I'm going to turn it over to Tricia Lloyd-Seidel to introduce our first speaker. If you'll unmute yourself, Tricia, that will help.
Okay, I have unmuted myself. Thank you. Thank you for joining me and helping me know when to talk and how to talk and all that good stuff. So just to remind you that in September, for those of us who were gathered, or many of you who have watched the event on the recorded version, we listened to 4 speakers as they described some pretty painful realities, descriptions of over-policing and the impact that it has on individuals, families, and communities. And then in October, we heard about alternatives to policing, including already existing alternatives of building networks of mutual aid and support in communities, and proposals to shift funding from police to community services. And now in November, as we come to the end of our 12-week campaign, we know that our work has just begun. The work of moving our predominantly white faith communities beyond the 2020 moment into sustained action. And that's our focus this evening. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Marcos Morales. He is part of the leadership cohort of Louisville's chapter of Mijente, a digital and grassroots organizing hub for Latinx rights, justice, and radical change. Marcos is of Purépecha indigenous descent. He's on the staff of the University of Louisville's Cultural Center, and he's a language justice organizer and an artist. Welcome, Marcos.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tricia. And thank you to you all for having me today. It's really always an honor to come and speak with community, and it is yeah, I'm just really happy to be here. It's been a long day, so happy to be with each of you all. So as I start, I would first like to acknowledge the land that we are on today, right now, right in this moment, which is the occupied land of the Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Osage tribal people, right? And so if we could just take a moment, everybody, and take one collective deep breath and recognize that land that we're on right now. And so breathing in. And a slow exhale. Very good. And so in that same breath, I also want to acknowledge and bring into the room a number of elders that have helped me to come to you all today, and with my practice of community accountability and transformative justice, and that people that have allowed me to practice this with them, right? And some of those people are Sara Nunez, Jenny Bencomo, Penny Sisto, Harry Pickens, and then my distant elders, Sherry Moraga and Cecilia Hernandez, just to name a few there. So, and so as, and then I also invite you all to put in the chat, or to put in the chat anybody who you wish to be here with us, any elder that has helped or is helping you to practice these practices of alternatives to policing, right? Because we all know, right, that one of the key things to this is community building, right? Because there's, if you all noted in the graphic that was on here before, there was the word interdependence, right? And this is key when we talk about healing justice, right? Because healing justice is something that, of course, is centered in healing and not punishment, right? Which is what the prison industrial complex is rooted in, right? Which is this whole idea of punishment when there is harm done, right? And so to the point of interdependence, right? It is really key that we lean on each other when harm is done, right? I think one of the things that I'm so grateful for about my practice of healing justice and transformative justice is the fact that I've been able to recognize that as easy as I can do harm, whether I mean to or not, I can also heal, right? Whereas in the past, before I had this practice of healing justice and transformative justice, it was very much, and this is very as of recent, right? I mean, this is really, I'm only about, I would say honestly, about 2 or 3 years into this practice, right? Of really leaning on community and not feeling like when I confront my traumas, that it is by myself in an isolated, individualistic manner, right? And so, that's kind of where I'm coming from, as far where I'm coming from, for the place that I'm coming from today, right? And as Trisha mentioned, right, I am a community organizer with Mijente, right? Mijente Louisville, and so there I have the honor and the privilege to work with what is called the Arts and Healing Circle, and it is within that circle that my practice of healing justice and transformative justice really started, right? That is where I've really gotten to get my hands really just into it, and just really build community and practice community accountability, right? And so what some of the key things that we do there, right, that I have had the opportunity to do there are this whole idea of decolonizing and indigenizing spaces, right? And so throughout my work there, it has been a lot about grounding when we do have gatherings, providing the grounding guidance, and then also we have had, we this past summer, of course, like many organizations here locally, we've been very busy, right, as we've had the uprising and dealing with the pandemic here in town, right? And so we spent many days throughout the summer together. As it was just very interesting this summer. A lot took place, right? It was just like this eruption of things that had been brewing now for decades, that just kind of culminated into this moment, right? And so we were, it wasn't any different. We had issues that came to our front door and demanded that we listen and that we transform the traumas that presented themselves, right? And so many hot days were spent together with the Mijente crew, right? And so that's where I really honestly got to experience a lot of a lot of this practice, right? Where it was simply it was a space that was 100% centered in healing, and this piece of community accountability, right? And it honored the people who had been harmed, and really allowed them to guide what needed to happen, right? What the healing process looks like, which is another component of healing justice, right? Is that healing should be done on your terms, right? On the person that has, on the person who has been perpetrated, right? And so that is, yeah, that is kind of where, again, like where it is that I'm coming from in my experiences of this. When we talk about alternative policing, right? I'm talking about this piece of something that is truly community centered, and that and where and it comes from that understanding of, right, that understanding of, that's honestly new to me, being totally honest. It's the whole idea of abolition, and the whole idea that that when people enter prisons, right, they honestly, they don't come out better, right? I have a few family members who are incarcerated, and I can't say with confidence that I can easily, very solidly say that they're not better off today when they entered there, some time ago, quite a bit ago. And so that brings me to these practices, right? Which I'm grateful to have stumbled upon these practices that really deal with really that transformation of the traumas that are present. And so with that, that's what I have. So yes, please. Andrew, are there any questions or anything?
Thank you so much, Marcos. I think we're going to have our question and answer after we hear from both you and Attica, and then folks are going to kind of ask questions in relation to what both of you have said.
Oh, sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, Marcos. Thank you for sharing your journey with us as you are learning more about healing and the paths that are going to be positive in our community. I want to introduce Attica Scott. I consider her a colleague and a friend. We've interfaced several times over the past few years. Attica is a state representative serving Kentucky House District 41, a former Metro Councilwoman as well. Serves on several House committees, including Public Protection. She is currently the author of Brianna's Law, which she will be discussing a little bit more. Attica is widely known as a community activist and organizer, as well as a certified anti-racism trainer. She's been an adjunct faculty member at JCTC in Bellarmine and taught English immersion actually in China. In 2017, she was recognized as one of 100 woke women by Essence magazine in the US, as well as many other state and national honors. Attica would say her proudest accomplishment is her son, Advocate, and her daughter, Ashanti. So we look forward to hearing from Attica on her experiences and what she hopes to accomplish as well. Thank you.
I literally cannot breathe. I can't see my daughter. Where is she? My eyes are burning. I have to take my face mask off of my nose and mouth to cover my eyes. I can't see. I'm falling. Why is this burning my eyes? Why is this smoke so thick? What did we do to deserve this? Black people are in the midst of twin pandemics of COVID-19 and institutional and systemic racism. Black people are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and we are constantly under the terror of the system of policing, a system that grew out of keeping our Black bodies enslaved. White night watchmen would hunt us down if we dared to escape the bondages of human trafficking known as slavery. They would hunt us down and drag us back by our hair to that hellhole of bondage and captivity. What did we do to deserve that? Those watchmen are now today's police forces. 244 days since Breonna Taylor was murdered on Friday, March 13th. 169 days of sustained protests, marches, rallies, and powerful solidarity. As we go into day 170 of seeking justice for Breonna Taylor, her family, her community, with sustained protests at Injustice Square Park, right here in Louisville, Kentucky, we are clear that we are moving with continued urgency in the movement for Black lives. And what I experience at Injustice Square Park is love, community, and solidarity. As my daughter Ashanti, who is a sophomore at the University of Louisville, always reminds me, we don't move in fear. I literally cannot breathe. I can't see my daughter. Where is she? My eyes are burning. I have to take my face mask off of my nose and mouth to cover my eyes. I can't see, I'm falling. Why is this burning my eyes? Why is this smoke so thick? What did we do to deserve this? What did we do to deserve this? As we were being tear gassed during the second day of protest on Friday, May 29th, I asked myself these questions. Why were the state troopers in Louisville? Why were police in riot gear and mobilizing violently against their neighbors who were marching and chanting and laying on the ground, hands up, kids on megaphones? But I saw none of that days later on Sunday, May 31st, in the predominantly white area of St. Matthews in District 41 that I represent, when we were out marching and chanting and drumming. Yet, the governor called out the National Guard on Black people on June 1st. Mr. David Yahya McAtee was murdered that night by the Guard, and there still has been no justice for him or his family. What is painfully clear to me from captivity, human trafficking, and our enslavement as Black people is that power, domination, and control over our bodies is exerted at every level of government. And as our government sanctioned continued violence against our protest, I asked myself some of the same pressing questions about why this was happening to us. As we plugged our ears in hopes of not having our eardrums burst because of the long-range acoustic devices, or as I call them, assault devices, used against us in June and July, I asked those questions. And I'm so grateful to my colleague, State Representative Lisa Wilner, who is currently working on legislation to demilitarize police forces in Kentucky. Why should our cars be blocked off by armored vehicles? Or why in the world would weapons of chemical warfare be used against our bodies? My daughter might choose to carry a child in the future. She might not, but if she chooses so, that's her business. I don't want her exposure to tear gas to harm her reproductive system. But the police violence didn't end on March 13th when Breonna Taylor was murdered, or on May 29th when we were tear gassed and I was shoved by a police officer, or when we ducked for cover when flashbangs were used in August. Over and over, we have been exposed to trauma on top of trauma and have too often been abandoned and left alone by politicians, some faith leaders, and far too many community folks. We felt that strongly when we faced an unjust arrest on Thursday, September 24th, nearly 4 months to the day that we were first assaulted by police. What did we do to deserve the lies that were told about us by police? That we had attempted to firebomb with a flare the beloved library in the district that I represent as state representative. The library where my son helped to start a book club when he was in elementary school. The library that I have fought for funding for every budget year. The library. So my daughter launched a campaign to get our Class D felony riot charges dropped, and they were. But on Monday, November 16th, we must go back to court to fight the absurd misdemeanor charges of failure to disperse and unlawful assembly. What I know for sure as we move forward in this movement for justice for Breonna Taylor is that these words from Audre Lorde are so true. When I care to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. I'm not afraid. Again, Ashanti reminds me often, we do not move in fear. I am a woman of faith, and no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Fear is a weapon to keep us silent, to keep us immobilized, to keep us believing that justice is an impossibility for Black folks, our Indigenous siblings, and other people of color. When we are not afraid, we can build some of the most powerful movements this world has ever seen. We are already doing it. Black women have been on the front lines for justice. My dear friend, Shamika Parrish-Wright, operations manager with the Bell Project in Louisville, has held down the space at Injustice Square Park in downtown Louisville, going on 170 days. Injustice Square Park has become the epicenter of the movement for justice for Breonna Taylor. My friends, Rena, Keela, Kalila, Tia, Tyra, Nicole, Jasmine, Carmen, Jamili, Cheyenne, and so many others have been feeding thousands of people for free, providing PPE to protesters for free, creating space for people who are houseless, creating an environment for worship, and de-escalating the issues that arise when folks begin to feel hopeless in the midst of extreme trauma. We knew we couldn't wait for anyone to show up for or with us. We've been the only ones in so many places and spaces protecting ourselves and one another. We are clear that our protests include policy change and include supporting a better generation of politicians, a generation that is growing out of this movement, and I love to see it. Our Latinx siblings have shown up with us through the leadership of the La Casita Center and many other groups who are now rebuilding the intersectional work that we started nearly a decade ago. We are relaunching our Black and Brown community and power building work together. Our LGBTQIA+ siblings have shown up with us through the leadership of the Fairness Campaign and many other groups that were holding weekly car caravans and marches for justice every Friday. It was beautiful to see queer folks showing up for justice for Breonna Taylor. Planned Parenthood has donated literally hundreds of Stand With Black Women shirts that people wear every day at the square. First Unitarian Church opened its doors to us in those days following the Attorney General's announcement that there would be no justice for Breonna Taylor. Our Muslim siblings have fed us and prayed with us. Let's move forward together into a different world that is built from love, community, and solidarity, and not the sting of lashes, and not from stolen land, but instead from our shared humanity. I have pre-filed Breonna's law for Kentucky to end the use of deadly no-knock warrants across the Commonwealth. This is a common sense measure to keep us all safe from police violence. 11 legislators of 100 across Kentucky agree. More than 4,300 community folks agree. And I hope you agree enough to ask your state representative to become a co-sponsor of Breonna's law if they haven't already. While policies and practices won't change hearts and minds, legal remedies can often keep someone from being able to inflict violence upon me and other folks who are targets of racial hatred. I believe that we can and we must abolish ICE. I believe that we can and we must defund police. The fight for freedom must never end until all of us who struggle under the weight of systemic oppression and structural racism are free. As my friend Shamika Parrish-Wright would say, we get there together. I became the first Black woman to serve in our state legislature in nearly 20 years because people believed in another Kentucky. As an activist and organizer, I spent years on the outside of government seeking justice. Now I work with people in my community to bring them inside when and where decisions are being made. That is what we are doing with Breonna's Law for Kentucky. And we know we can't do this alone. As Zora Neale Hurston would say, Love makes your soul crawl out from its hiding place. Move and step out of whatever is hiding you, whatever you are using as a barrier to keep you from fighting for justice, and join the rest of us as we do this work while we continue to say her name, Breonna Taylor.
Thank you so much. Deep breath. Policies, practices, leadership. Yes. We have an opportunity now to digest a little bit, chew on what we've been hearing, and to interact with Marcos and Attica. We're going to use the chat function to put the questions that you may have. And Andrew Stone Porter will be moderating the questions. He'll read them in the chat. So I invite you all now to go to the chat function. If you don't know where it is, I think we've got mostly repeat Zoomers here, but it's down at the very bottom of your screen where you'll see it says chat, and you just click there and write what you'd like to ask one or both of them. And now I'll turn it over to Andrew Stone Porter for a period of question answers, which will probably be not the kinds of answers that says, here's 3 things to solve these problems, but the kinds of answers that will help us all push deeper and to commit to stronger action. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Tricia. And thanks, Attica and Marcos, for those wonderful presentations. I look forward to receiving your questions in the chat. In the meantime, I was taking notes on what I heard, and some of our team came up with a couple of questions beforehand. I see questions are already coming in from the chat, which is great. Let me just throw out one question I heard, and just to get us started. Marcos, I loved what you said about interdependence and how the key to enacting interdependence is leaning on each other when harm is done, and that healing justice means that healing has to be done on the terms of the person who has been harmed. I want to connect that a little bit with what Attica said about this quote from Audre Lorde about using our strength in the service of our vision. What the quote reminded me of in her stories of being tear gassed by LMPD was another quote from Audre Lorde, who also talks about interdependence and says, interdependency between women is a way for the I to be creative, that there's a generative power that comes out of our differences, that our differences aren't something that we have to flee from, but they're actually a source of creativity. And I think, Attica, you built on that a little bit when you were talking about the ways that there are now Black and Brown coalitions between what's going on at Breonna Square, and with La Casita Center, with the LGBTQ community, with Planned Parenthood. What I hear there, just to connect these two reflections, is a possibility of healing, and a healing coming from people who have been harmed across difference. A coalitional politics with folks who are experiencing marginalization, envisioning healing and envisioning that healing across difference. I wonder if that is something that is important for the possibility of liberation, and maybe something in those rambling thoughts might resonate, and one of you might want to respond to that.
Yeah, I'll say one thing that definitely comes to me with that is that as as a facilitator of community accountability and healing justice and transformative justice, I'm very conscious that when I show up in those spaces and I'm asked to come and facilitate some sort of community accountability type of deal, I'm very conscious that there's one foot of me is living in the envisioned world where liberation is this inside job, and I am where I have the abolitionist mindset of this is where I'm going to, this is why I am here fully present, hosting this, trying to transform, not trying, but hosting a space for the transformation of this trauma to happen. And then the other part of me is here, right? Which is Louisville, Kentucky, 2020, and what is happening in the present day, where the U.S. is the nation with the most incarcerated people, is the most incarcerated nation in the world, right? And just dealing with all of those realities, right, of being in the South. And so there's definitely one foot that is in this dream world, and the other foot that is very much present in what is actually happening, right? And I think that creative genius that comes out as I'm facilitating different things, and we use that creativity to create these connections that you're talking about. I think it is all very key to bringing forward the transformations that we're seeking currently. So.
I don't have anything to add, Andrea. Marco summed it up to me.
Very good. Another question that came in the chat. What would you like to see from supporters that are living in surrounding counties? I think this is a question that could come to either of you, right? Folks who are not in Jefferson County, folks who are not right in the middle of Louisville where it's all happening, where the protests are happening, but they might be out in Oldham County or Henry County or in Southern Indiana or anywhere else. What kind of specific ways do you feel like folks could plug into what's happening in Louisville and in ways that would be helpful?
Well, I will say that over the course of the summer, it was amazing for me to see people across Kentucky, quite honestly, who were holding solidarity marches and rallies, solidarity with Justice for Breonna Taylor, solidarity with the movement for Black Lives. Pike County, I went to Ashland, to Berea, and to Brandenburg for their actions. But we saw, 1,000 people who showed up in Bowling Green for Justice for Breonna Taylor. So all across Kentucky, folks have been showing up. Specifically for me, though, I would say that if your state representative is not a co-sponsor of Breonna's Law, then I would call on you and ask that you reach out to them. It doesn't matter whether you like them or not. It doesn't matter whether or not they're your favorite. This is about justice for Breonna Taylor and her family and her community. And so, I encourage you to reach out to them, ask them to be a co-sponsor of Breonna's Law. If you haven't signed on yet as a community co-sponsor of Breonna's Law, you can do that as well. And sign on as a community co-sponsor, because that just sends a strong message of the thousands and thousands and literally thousands of people who believe that Kentucky deserves Breonna's Law. I would also say that if you have the means to donate $5 or $10 or more to the work that's going on at Injustice Square Park to feed people hot meals, to provide them with PPE, then donate that $5 or that $10 to the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And also support the Bail Project. I was locked up with my daughter and Shamika, who's operations manager of the Bail Project. They're bailing people out because they believe that freedom should be free. And so they need some financial support to be able to continue to do that. So I believe there are many different ways that folks can support what we're trying to do here in Louisville. You probably have your own work that you need to do in your own community as well. Are y'all having conversations at the city council level about declaring racism as a public health crisis in your city? If not, start that conversation. Find a council person that you can talk to say, be a sponsor of a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. And then what goes with that resolution is funding and ordinances to create laws that support racism as a public health crisis.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that last part, which is what first surged in me as you asked that, Andrew. And it was organize, and organize. You know, there is work to do wherever you all are at, and believe it or not, by you all coming together, building community, organizing around whatever the needs are around your community, you are helping the health of Louisville in many ways. So I definitely encourage those people who are on the outskirts. Yeah, you know, liberation. Just like I said it in my last statement, it's an inside job, very much so. And so it's whether that is you reflecting more as well as to what your traumas are, whether that is you being more appreciative of who you are, whatever. Like we go as minimal or as large as that, right? I think any of those things would help tremendously.
Couple of questions I'll just sort of put together in terms of specific policy initiatives that have come in from Facebook, folks that are watching on the Facebook live feed. Of course, Attica, you have foregrounded and you have spearheaded this campaign to get Breonna's Law passed statewide. Folks are asking about other initiatives that may or may not be helpful to support, including the Breathe Act, the Thrive Agenda, abolition, local divest, invest initiatives, and then a question about marijuana legalization and enforcement of drug laws that is disproportionately that disproportionately impacts communities of color. Any thoughts about other legislative initiatives that you would want to comment on?
I'll try to remember everything that you lifted up. I'll say first and foremost, yes, please support the Breathe Act. We need to support legislation that is very clear in centering Black lives. And I say often to folks that if we can figure this out as it relates to institutional and systemic racism, then we can figure out a whole lot of other isms in our country. And so that's one of the reasons why I really push to dismantle racism and to amplify those policies and practices and procedures that allow Black folks to thrive rather than only survive, because survival is exhausting. I would like to thrive at some point in time. I would also say that I think someone mentioned Representative Wilner's demilitarization bill. Yes, when she files that bill in January, when the session begins, please support that bill. She's wanting to end the use of the LRADs, the long range acoustic devices that can burst your eardrums, in the use of militarized vehicles and chemical weapons like tear gas. So please support that piece of legislation, because I think that if we can at least get police to stop using those tools against us, then that will make a difference in our health, at least, if not our safety. And then I truly believe that we have to defund the police. I believe we need to reallocate those funds that are taken away from police to meet the actual economic and social needs of our neighbors. I believe we need to dismantle the system because it doesn't work for a whole lot of us. I don't really know if it works for any of us, because at least here in Louisville, police aren't really solving a whole lot of crimes, and I don't know if they're preventing a whole lot of crimes either. And then we need to reimagine what community safety looks like. It goes back to what Marcos was saying around community safety and how that can look differently.
I'm good. I think that was great.
Great. Thanks to you both. A question coming in. Obviously, we had a presidential election last week in which 70 million Americans voted for a candidate who said Black people should vote for him because they have nothing else to lose, and who started off his campaign by proclaiming that Mexican immigrants were rapists and the like. A question coming in: how do we start to bridge the divide between parties? And I just offer that preface to that question because it's an awfully big divide between what I've just said and what we're hearing tonight? Is that something that is possible? How is it possible? Is it something for which we should strive? If so, how should we direct our energies toward that end?
I will say, for me, it's actually less a partisan divide than it is a divide around ethnicity and race. I'm a Democrat, and I'm just going to say it, Democrats can be crappy and have absolutely no racial justice analysis. And so 70 million people, I'm not convinced that they were necessarily voting for a Republican president because Donald Trump hasn't always been Republican. I believe they were voting to try to maintain whiteness and white nationalism. So I really think that the divide continues to be a divide around race and a divide around ethnicity. I mean, we see it when you have almost 700 kids who may never see their parents again. That's to me not a partisan issue. That's about ethnicity. It's about race. It's again about power, domination, and control over our bodies and our lives. So for me, the work that has to be done is the work that organizations like LSURG do. Louisville showing up for racial justice. We need more white folks showing up for racial justice and holding one another accountable and having these conversations with one another.
Yeah, and I'll say for me, my natural gut instinct to that question is to I don't, the whole bridging thing. I don't see that should be the focus. I think the focus here should be around what are the needs of our communities. And I think Arizona is a prime example of that, of what took place there. We're talking about a place that a decade ago introduced the most anti-immigrant law, SB 1070, and I mean it, and there started the foundation. And no, even before then, there had been people organizing, but that really vamped it up. And we see what can be done when there is sustained organizing throughout, right? We've seen that now it flipped, right? And so, I mean, I think those things, those things are, it was a really, really timely thing, but it was very strategic. It was very strategically done. And I think it's something that, it's something that I was joking with some of my friends. I was like, I'll probably be on my deathbed when Kentucky becomes a battleground state, right? Like, we finally, but yeah, and I think, like, again, back to the question though, should we be worried about bridging? No, I think we should be really focused on what the needs are and organizing behind those. And naturally, at the end of the day, the president affects very little of what the president holds is the landscape of the organizing, which we're going to be organizing the next 4 years. But it doesn't dictate much of what happens at the community level, right? In terms of us showing up for each other and looking out for each other and doing ice watches, ice chasing things, and providing food for one another, being there for each other when traumas do come up. See, those things, I mean, it's just it's irrelevant, right? And so that's those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Marcos and Attica. Yeah, Marcos, that's a fantastic example of what happened in Arizona, right? To get from Sheriff Joe Arpaio just a couple of years ago to now Arizona being a blue state proves that transformation is possible, and that it's probably more possible at the local and statewide level than necessarily directing all of our energies toward bridging the divides between national parties. Thank you for that reframing. A question about how, so the Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Justice and Louisville Showing Up for Racial Justice Faith have worked together on these emerging conversations to bring people of faith and communities of faith together as resources, right? The folks who are present for these conversations are ideally going to report back to our faith communities, and begin to organize our faith communities toward support for these initiatives. And so what would either of you like to see specifically from faith communities as this work goes forward? What are ways that churches, congregations, organizations that we're a part of here tonight might be able to mobilize our resources in the direction of abolishing white supremacy?
So one of the things that I really do feel like needs to happen over the course of these next few months is really getting closer to those communities of faith that are going to continue to be, and probably even targeted even more over the course of the next year, because just because we have a new administration in the White House doesn't mean that the hate has gone away. And, you know, my soul tells me that the hate mongers are going to be even worse because they're angry, they're mad that they lost. So, you know, the connections that y'all can make with our local Muslim community, right? And we saw in Lexington, the vandalism that was directed toward people who are Jewish. So really, you know, all of these different faith groups kind of coming together and supporting the folks who are going to be targets for this increased hatred, to me, is really important. And then the other is, you know, I think that it's vital that you connect with your other churches locally and across the state to really dig deep into the conversation around how white people can show up for racial justice, how white people can be part of the push to defund and dismantle police departments across Kentucky. You know, LMPD is the worst, and we've seen how awful it is, but LMPD is not by itself. In our rural communities, we just don't hear about what the sheriffs are doing to folks in rural communities. But, you know, I've had folks contact me in my office in Frankfurt and ask, you know, if we can do something around police accountability in Appalachia. So the work has to expand beyond the two biggest cities, Lexington and Louisville. It has to go all across Kentucky, because that's how we build. You know, I think about one of the things that Reverend Barber often says, which is that there really are no red states. There are states that are unorganized. And so, you know, to your point, Marcos, about being on your deathbed before we get there, you know, we can get there if we do the work of organizing across Kentucky. That's the work that has to happen.
And I'll start off with the statement of deepen your practice of solidarity, specifically amongst each other. And with that, I mean very simply, literally our I think so I think the more and more you all deepen your understanding of one another and what is happening, and you all are aware of the connections that you all have, coming to the table every week in an intentional way for when crisis like what Attica or what happened in Lexington takes place, you all are quick to respond to those things, right? You're definitely on your toes, and everybody knows what everyone is good at. And so I think deepening, creating spaces where you all can build community and get to know each other even more. I think that the more intertwined that you all, I feel like the more you all understand, these communities understand. I think that's what church leaders can do is be more intentional now more than ever about people truly getting to know one another. So when these things happen, when crisis does happen, it's as fluid as can be as far as the response, right? So that's what I think.
Thank you, Marcos and Attica, for those responses. A couple of questions have come in regarding efforts toward reforming LMPD in terms of practices, imposing new restrictions on police behavior, defunding police. Statements coming out from Metro Council and elsewhere that Metro Council, essentially their hands are tied because Kentucky state law prevents them from making these changes. There are statutes in the Kentucky state law that say that Metro Council cannot enforce any legislative changes to LMPD policies. Any comments on that in terms of whether we need to be directing our energies toward Metro Council versus the Kentucky State Legislature, and how so for Attica specifically? Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, we need to do both because Metro Council is not absolved of any responsibility as it relates to LMPD. They just approved a new contract for them that was negotiated on by the mayor. So Metro Council can choose not to continue to allocate 2/3 of the city's budget to policing. There's no state law that says 2/3 of your budget has to go to policing. So Metro Council can choose to reallocate those funds to meet the actual needs of our people. People need affordable housing. People need access to fresh foods. We need a robust public transportation system. We need mental health services. We have so many other needs that could be addressed with the literal millions that are spent on over policing our communities and our bodies. And I will, also say that there is quite a bit that Metro Council can do at the local level, or the mayor can do at the local level. The mayor could have made the decision to fire the officers who murdered Breonna Taylor. He chose not to. He claimed because he didn't want the city to be sued. So you would rather continue to employ people who commit murder because you don't want them to sue you for firing them. That doesn't seem to me to be a community response to a horrific act. Every single day, it seems like we're learning more and more about LMPD. And it's, for example, what we learned this week about their abuse of young people in the Explorer program. Many of us already knew about that, but there's more information that just recently came out. So yeah, Metro Council and the mayor can actually do more to hold LMPD accountable. And yes, there is some work that has to happen at the state level. I remain shocked that Oldham County is our neighbor and the Speaker of the House is from Oldham County. And I feel like we don't do anything to hold him accountable. It blows my mind every time I walk into the halls of Frankfurt for the beginning of session. I keep thinking, what is going on? Oldham County is our neighbor. The Speaker of the House is in Oldham County. He can choose what bills are and are not heard, and we do nothing. There's no advocacy. There are no actions targeting him, nothing. So I just believe that has to change. Like we can't keep allowing him to operate as if, he could do whatever he wants to, because it's exactly what we're doing. We're allowing him to go held unaccountable. So there is some action and advocacy that has to happen at the state level. For example, Louisville can have a Citizens Police Review Board, but it doesn't have any subpoena power. The state would have to make that possible. And Representative Nima Kulkarni is working on that legislation right now to allow municipalities to create civilian review boards that have subpoena power. So I'm just saying, I believe it has to be both local and state. We can't let Metro Council off the hook, can't let the mayor off the hook. And we got to do more at the state level.
Andrew, we have time for one more question.
Great. I've got one more question for Marcos. So there's, Marcos, of course, you've got a lot of experience around healing and restorative practices. There's many campaigns out to encourage people not to call the police in a situation of crisis, but to seek out alternatives for doing so. If, for example, someone is behaving in an erratic way, or if there is some situation that comes up where ordinarily we might think, oh, this might be dangerous, let me just call the police. Instead, we might think about alternatives to doing that. I wonder if, based in your expertise in healing and restorative practices, if you have guidance, particularly for white folks, around alternatives to calling the police.
Yes. So the first thing that I'd like to address there is so just not to say that calling things restorative is incorrect or anything, but when we talk about restorative, or like when we put that next to something like transformative justice, restorative justice has this idea, right, that we must restore things back to where things were, when in reality that is what actually caused the harm to begin with. And so I encourage us to think about this term of transformative justice, where we think of what the harm that has happened, the harm that has come to our laps, and we have it here with some agency, and some deep attention to be able to transform this, right? Because I'm a big believer in that trauma is actually one of the biggest, some of the it's some of the worst energy that is present on earth, honestly, right? Is these traumas, right? And so thinking of them more as a way to transform instead of a restore back to whatever that was, right? Is one point, right? And then I think that this frame of transformation is key to when we think about how we're not going to call the police, right? And the key, I think, there is that one thing that you all have heard me speak of a lot, I know because I've said it a lot, is this community building piece. There is, when there is crisis, when there is harm done, it is on the relationships. That is where we fall on relationships and what relationships have been built to be able to then deal with the harm that is being caused. Because the truth is, when there is harm, you don't call an external person. In transformative justice, you don't call an external person. You call someone that is already trusted, where there is already that connection, where there is already that understanding that other person truly trusts that they are going to do this work with their best interest, right? And so that part, that's why you all have heard me mention the term community building so much, is because that is such a keystone for transformative and healing justice. And so I think the question talked about, right, if there was some sort of mental illness that was happening, and how the community would respond, right? It would be very specific people who would respond to that, right? People who already have a relationship built with that person, who are on site, and helping to guide that person through what is happening, right? And so it would be somewhere along those lines, right? And there would be a whole team of people in my mind, right, that would help to bring forward everything to de-escalate and to transform what has taken place.
Thank you both, Marcos and Attica.
I really appreciate both of you being here tonight. We appreciate your energy, your perseverance, and your work going forward. And hopefully it's challenged us to think of other ways we can be helpful to you, either by showing up in person, by giving money, by writing letters, by whatever, signing petitions, lots of different ways. I'm going to turn the evening over to David Horvath, who is going to kind of frame our discussions and summarize some of the things we have talked about and lead us in a short exercise on where we go, what our next steps are. Thank you, David.
Hi, everybody, and thank you to Representative Scott and to Marcos for some amazing stories and comments and answers to questions that just help to clarify even more how important this work is that we're doing. Again, my name's David Horvath, and I'm kind of wearing 3 hats as part of the organizing team for the fall campaign, which we called Sacred Spaces, Community Safety for All. The 4 organizations that have been involved in all parts of the planning in this campaign of virtual and in-person prayer and reflections that we've had every Wednesday, plus these 3 emerging conversations, our L-Surge Faith, which is a project of L-Surge specifically, focusing on organizing white faith spaces to work for racial justice. The Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Justice is connected to L-Surge Faith and has organized around support and solidarity with the local Latinx community and with immigrant justice issues. The Sowers of Justice Network actively works with faith communities of various faith traditions and as individuals who are working for social justice concerns. And of course, Mijente, our friends in Mijente of Louisville have participated in each of our 3 emerging conversations. Mijente is a national Latinx grassroots organization that works to fight back against oppressive systems and build a Latinx political movement, and utilizing language and healing justice projects for their collective liberation. My challenging task for the next few minutes is to provide some very broad summing up of what we have heard and learned over these months of this campaign, and how this effort will move forward and grow roots and branches of solidarity with predominantly white faith communities and faith leaders. I will not be summarizing all the amazing stories we've heard from our speakers and from each other. All of the events in the campaign are available as videos on the L-Surge YouTube page, and I posted that link in a little bit. Also, don't worry about taking a lot of notes during this time when we're displaying some information. We'll be sending follow-up emails with links and details to everyone who has registered or signed up for our weekly emails, which will continue until the end of November. Those of you on Facebook, I will post those links to you as well. So the big question, what's next? There will be a coalescing of this work as groups in the community identify the emerging strategy that leads to true safety, health, and liberated communities for all of us. It is important that we see this work as our work, that we don't get overwhelmed by what might look to be complicated or disorganized efforts with too many groups and individuals pushing and pulling in different directions. And that we begin with the first steps of making changes within ourselves and also the groups that we go to church, temple, or mosque with. How did we see this campaign from the beginning? What about community safety for all? Our events were intended to lean into these conversations, particularly as it relates to our faith communities. We looked in the beginning at what's going on in our local community. And this summer, there's been plenty going on. And this movement has moved quite dramatically. We talked about the history of policing, with the increasing level of militarized policing and the current realities where many communities, Black, brown, immigrant, LGBTQ, houseless, just don't feel safe and secure and do not trust many or most of our public institutions to help. We talked about alternatives to violent policing and provided a space for dreaming about what a safe community means for everyone and look to emerging models of how we can make those communities a reality. We will continue to move into further actions with campaigns now taking form through a number of community channels, from Mijente, the BLM, the Kentucky Alliance, the Urban League, and others. We're aware of a legislative work that has to be done that Attica described so well. And we are well aware that the architects and builders of this community must be those who have been most impacted, and that must be led by Indigenous and people of color. And from our listening these weeks, we heard loud and clear that whatever efforts develop to reforming policing and reimagining public funding for real changes, that white people need to be in the political and spiritual fight up front, because white people created these institutions and systems and inequities to begin with. We need to dismantle them. We all know that things aren't working, and so how can we imagine and live into new ways for community safety? As people of faith, we hope we start there with our stories and faith framing. So Phil's going to show a share screen with a chart that has pieces of the emerging work moving forward that we have been able to identify through our conversations with others and organizations and from our own conversations at these sessions. Fortunately, we have clearly described goals and vision and policy statements from national organizations and campaigns. I'm speaking about the Movement for Black Lives, which was launched as a comprehensive and visionary policy agenda for the post-Ferguson Black liberation movement. It was established in 2016. The vision of Movement for Black Lives, endorsed by over 50 Black-led organizations in their ecosystem, and hundreds of allied organizations and individuals, has inspired many campaigns across the countries to achieve their goals. Their Invest and Divest campaign is a comprehensive vision and policy platform for achieving community safety for all. Their work on police reform is coming through the National Breathe Act campaign. The Ella Baker Center for Human Rights Organizing is an organization and resource we discovered looking carefully at their Night Out for Safety and Liberation. This is a comprehensive program and effort by the Ella Baker Center. It's an annual national event that focuses on the most intersectional and inclusive dreams and plans for community safety. Then there's El-Surge Faith National, and that has a community safety for all campaign as well, which is ready to roll out for interested faith communities. And it's a structured programs for faith communities centered on the question, should I or we call the police? It goes in amazing places once the conversation is started. Then the most dazzling array of local and state work is ongoing. Some of what we've heard about already this evening. El-Surge Faith and ICIJ and Mijente. We're going to be moving forward with what we've learned around this Community Safety for All campaign this fall. Campaign Zero of Kentucky is becoming a really energized effort. It's an active campaign coming together with national support that focuses on changing local political work involving police contracts, metro budgeting, and policies. Brianna's Law, which we heard from Attica. The law would ban no-knock search warrants and increase police accountability. Divest, Invest Louisville is a local support for the Movement for Black Lives campaign. And then BLM Louisville itself is newly reorganized and moving forward, and it has been engaged in a number of related projects, including healing work, housing, mutual aid, Feeding the West, evictions, and the community bail fund that they work with. And then the Bail Project, which Attica also mentioned, is a very important local chapter in an organization which pushes for change in cash bail and policy in the incarceration and justice systems. The Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, been around since the late 1960s, is long focused on Citizens Against Police Abuse or Civilian Police Review, and the People's Budget Campaign to do some analysis of the budget relative to this work. Also, there's organizing with efforts to educate and change Louisville's metro policy through lobbying and community organizing. Some brand new things that are popping up, one called Metro Watch and Take the Seats. These are tracking and lobbying groups watching Metro Council members on issues relating to community safety and liberation, such as the FOP contract negotiations recently. Finally, there are a number of groups that have organized around other ways to secure some community safety, including several that were mentioned by Attica and Marcos that I totally missed on this list, which is amazing. The Center for Health Equity, very important in terms of defining racism as a public health concern. The Fairness Campaign, getting deeply involved in those protections that need to be there for the LGBTQ community. The Black and Brown Initiative that Attica mentioned with the La Casita Center. And all of these need to be on this list. And in addition, we have food justice and food distribution programs that we're looking at that already exist in town, including New Roots and Fresh Stop and SAL, which is Sustainable Agriculture Louisville. The Hope Bus, which we heard about, providing food and services and pastoral support in the school bus. The Reparations Roundtable, Feed Louisville, Louisville Mutual Aid Network, Change Today, Change Tomorrow, and Hip Hop Cares. These are all groups that are actively engaged and operating and providing support and resources. And finally, we have just service and referral organizations, which are so important for those people who are in need. Louis Connect is coming out of the Family Scholars House. Cornerstone is providing those kinds of support for the mental health communities. United Way and Metropolitan Housing Coalition also provide their services to a broad range of community people who are desperately in need. So we're going to start a little new page when we go into this chat at the end so that we can begin adding some specifics from you all. But before we open up for that conversation, I need to take a deep breath because I'm trying to fit all of this in, but we need to stress that just looking at this list I just went through without rank or recommendation is really overwhelming. Sorry, but not sorry. Take a deep breath. This compilation is really a step as we see the powerful community of change makers in motion. It helps us to lean into these conversations. Each of us wants to do more, but as individuals, we can't do it all. Sometimes we think we can, or we feel we should, and that's not healthy. That work is up to us as a collective. So we will continue to listen and learn from Black and Brown and immigrant leaders in this community. But let's give ourselves a little mercy at this point. Things have been a little strange with a pandemic, an uprising, and an attempted coup. Also, knowing more about the issues and others who are working on them will help as we commit to that emerging work. We need to discern that what work we can do as individuals, faith communities, members, and citizens. There'll be a lot of entry points based on our skills and experience, and people need to be called in from where they're at and not thrown away because they are still learning. There is education to begin and continue in small and large groups. And this will require folks who are good at communicating, often wonky policies and ways to follow our faith traditions and the calls that we hear for justice. There will be lots and lots of phone calls and repeat phone calls and communications with elected and public officials. There's plenty of work to do, and everyone can do something, even while social distancing. So let's find our lanes and not be distracted by all the talking trees we encounter as we find joy in the emerging forest and a better world for everyone. So for the next 10 minutes or so, let's hear some of your thoughts. Please use the chat or raise your hand to do so. To raise your hands, just remember to open the participants list and click on the More button or the 3 dots at the bottom. Your hand raises will be taken in order of those received. If it looks like we're going to run out of time, please do put your thoughts in the chat as we will be saving these. Phil will be adding some things to our document here on the screen. So the question now for us all, what piece speaks to you for the what's next question to engage faith communities in these conversations and actions? Or what's next for you, maybe you as an individual, or more personal commitment to change and ending white silence in our own community. So let's open this up. We're going to leave this document on the screen, and I am going to watch the participants list and wait for a hand to come up. I believe that will include our questions and comments from our speakers as well at any point. So we can be patient, and I know you have suggestions and thoughts. I'll rephrase the question, or I'll reform the question. What's next to engage faith communities in these conversations and actions? Or as an individual, what personal commitment can you make to change to end white silence in our own communities? Thanks again for putting things in chat as well as raising your hand. Phil Lloyd Sato, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm very involved with a Buddhist community at this point in my life. It's called the Louisville Vipassana Community. And a number of us have been involved in planning the in-person vigils during this 12-week campaign for community safety for all people. And something that has grown out of that is or that is being germinated is this idea that this has been so fun to work together. And one of the initiatives that we're going to be exploring in the coming months is the formation of a possible Buddhist inspired, maybe not limited, but Buddhist inspired at least, peace and justice organization in Louisville. There's many great interfaith organizations, and David has listed a couple of them. But this has been a direct inspiration from the work of this campaign, the 12 weeks. And the planners of this are pretty excited about it. I'm going to go back to the screen share and put that on.
And we have a couple of really good responses in the chat as well, Phil, that we can be adding to our list as we move forward. I might pop off real quickly and check our Facebook crew and see what they have to say. There are several comments about the challenge of not calling the police. And I mentioned that the LSurge, the National LSurge campaign, has a program that unpacks that question in terms of a process in the faith community. And I'm going to put maybe Tricia on the spot to say a little bit more of that, because I think she has looked at that program, and I'm curious as to how that conversation can unfold in a faith community.
Yes, LSurge has put together, it's sort of a 4-movement thing, and it's really to have the conversation, to talk as a, I know I have a few folks from my church, Crescent Hill Presbyterian, so I'll use that example. We would get together as, whoever wanted to talk about what would it look like if we decided as a congregation to call for help in some other way than calling the police in X, Y, or Z comment. And it leads to a lot of different questions that whatever you end up deciding to do or not do, it's sort of a way to have an action reflection. So here's a potential action. Let's really dig into it, rather than just having, often when we have studies, we have a study and then at the end we say, okay, what should we do? This is a big problem, let's do something. This one kind of starts with an action item and then unpacks it as a way of doing the study. And we've got copies of it, and we've got people that are willing to help a congregation that might be interested in doing that. You're muted, David.
Thanks, Tricia. That was very helpful. And I was going to also put Matthew on the spot for just a second, because Matthew was one of the facilitators for that conversation that we had as ICIJ back when we were talking about ICE enforcement and other things. And we were in a church community speaking just about that. What does security look like within that community? Matthew, do you recall those conversations that evening and how challenging they were?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was thinking about that just a little bit earlier while part of the discussion was going on, and yeah, I think some of it really, I think, has to do with those of us who identify as white and those of us, who are part of predominantly white faith communities to do a lot of unlearning about what safety means. And I mean, I think as Americans in general, we've probably all been indoctrinated to a certain extent to always think of safety as being police oriented. But I think especially those of us who are white, I think, have always operated on this assumption of, that the police are here to protect us. So I think that there was a lot of unlearning that needs to be done. And I think that I remember that conversation, and I remember being kind of struck by just how much of that assumption was coming out in our, otherwise, I think supportive and, sympathetic, faith communities that nevertheless still were operating under this idea that, like, sort of, not all cops, and I don't know, ideas that sort of seem to suggest a very particular, like, mind frame that I think I think we all need to do some unlearning around that, but I think that that's a big need.
Thanks, Andrew. Or thanks, Matthew. That was great, and it's good to have you back with us after it's been a couple of years since those conversations, and look how much energy it's picked up. So.
So maybe, given the hour, Andrew, now that we've put Matthew on the spot and made him talk, would you formally introduce him? Because he's agreed to prayerfully close us tonight. And as David has said, please go ahead and put anything in the chat that you would like us to be, to have as notes of this meeting of your thoughts.
All right, thanks, Tricia. And yes, Matthew Arlick is a chaplain at Level 1 Trauma Center in Philadelphia, PA, and an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA. When he was in Louisville, he was part of our steering committee as the Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Justice, and helped us to guide us, as David was just pointing out, in our early conversations around policing. Some conversations where we were trying to connect the dots between immigration enforcement and police. And some of those conversations were not as easy to have, and some of those connections were not as easy to make as I think they are becoming clearer now, in part because of the work of organizers throughout the country, Matthew included, who have struggled to encourage us to make them. He was also active in the Occupy ICE protests in 2018. Matthew's currently working in Philly with Power Interfaith, which is a faith-based community organizing coalition that is centered on racial and economic justice. Matthew, thank you for taking the time tonight to be with us and to weave together what we have heard in a prayerful way.
Thanks, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. So I would just ask at this time that each person just assume a whatever reflective posture is meaningful to you, whatever prayerful posture is important to you, and let's join together. Holy One, we thank you for gathering us today in this time and in this space. And as we close this time of reflection and planning, we thank you for blessing us with honest speech and courageous hearts. We thank you for the leadership of our Black and brown siblings, activists and protesters, parents and children, grassroots leaders and elders, who remind us of the directive that we keep us safe. And forgive us, Holy One, for our very human trespasses, even as we struggle to do justice. For the times when our first thought was to call the police on our neighbor before engaging with them. For the moments when we have remained silent when hateful policies have been enacted against our immigrant siblings and closed our eyes to ICE terrorizing undocumented families. Help us, Holy One, to envision a world of sanctuary and of mutual aid, where strong communities support themselves and wrongs are made right through circles of your transformative justice. Open our eyes and our hearts to a future where police are not just reformed, but are made no longer necessary. And we say, Ashe, Inshallah, and Amen.
Thank you, Matthew. And thanks to each and every one of you for coming tonight and for coming repeatedly. Lots of familiar, if you can call knowing somebody on Zoom familiarity, but names and faces that we've seen several times. We're very grateful. As I said earlier, our work is not done, but we're going to take a well-deserved break. We do have one more week in the campaign. We will have our next Wednesday vigils, both virtual and out there on the waterfront by the river. And you will continue to get a couple more emails from us with some of the resources and some thoughts about what's next. So thank you very much. Take good care.